Okay, so we're back. So when we left off from Python Tutor, we wanted a way to be able to specify the number of elements in the array that we were creating. Okay, so let's actually go ahead and see how we can fix that problem. Let me get rid of this, get rid of that. And so I'm going to say let's declare the length of the array. Okay, now to do that I'm going to use a special keyword. The first time you're seeing this keyword, as we proceed through the course, you're going to see a lot more of it, and I'm going to actually discuss it. Okay, so I'm going to say const, right? You've never seen that before. And then I'm going to just give a name, or a type, sorry. Let's say it has to be int. And then I'm going to give the size, the name of the variable, which I'm going to call size, capital letters, okay? The name could be anything, but we tend to use the name size, right? That's kind of the standard name. And then we provide a value, maybe 5, okay? Good. So now, when I want to create an array, I'm going to say int, maybe doubles. Let's say doubles. Okay. Let's call it maybe sizes. Not sizes, but measurements. It's a better name. Measurements. Okay. And now I don't want to put 5. I actually want to say size. Okay. And so what the compiler will do is to substitute size for 5. All right. And then of course we can go ahead and we can easily say measurement 0. Can be 11.25 and so on. Okay, so again, when you want to pre-declare the size or the length of an array, you have to introduce the word const. Okay, and then the type, which has to be an int, and then of course we specify a variable name. Typically we use uppercase letters, capital letters. And then of course we provide the actual size. All right, so this is how we do it, and this is how we'll always do it. All right, so with that out of the way, I want to dive into this video's topic, which is the idea of removing the boredom, the repetitiveness of having to print out every item in the array one by one. So could you imagine if I had 66, 77, 88, 99, maybe 100, 101, right? And if I wanted to print out every item in this array, then I would have to add an additional 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I would have to have 11 cout statements, right? So I would have to have a bunch of couts, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? And I have to keep going, right? So this is just, you noticing, we're repeating code, right? And so that allows me to introduce to you the very important concept of iteration, which is just a way of saying, how can we get the computer, or how can we instruct the computer to do a specific task okay, like printing out each item without having to write the code that many times. So that's what we want to look at right now. So let me get rid of all of this. Okay, let me come back here, and let me go back to my original array, maybe 7. Okay, so I'm gonna attempt to print out all 7 items without having to write 7 couts. Okay, so how do I do that? Well, that's what we're gonna learn. So iteration, right? So I use the for loop, as they call it, and the for loop has an open and close parenthesis, and there are 3 parts to this construct. Right? What it allows me to do is to repeat code any number of times that I specify. So in this case, I'm trying to tell it I want it to repeat the printing of the 7 items. So how do I do that? Well, for an array, we'll simply specify a temporary variable, which we tend to call I. Why I? Well, it's short for index. Right? Position. So we're going to say I, okay, is 0. Okay, and a semicolon. So what I have effectively done here is to create a temporary variable called I, and it will contain 0 initially, and it will keep changing. So it will be 0, and then it will move on to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It will take the position. Okay, and then after the semicolon, I'm going to have a test. In this case, I'm going to say I less than the size. Okay, and so we know the size is 7, so we are going to put 7. Okay, and finally I'm going to say I plus plus. Okay, curly braces. So what is step 2? Well, it turns out that if I don't make this test, remember this is a test, it will either return true or false. If I don't make a test, then I will not know when to stop in the loop or in the array. Remember, we want to stop at 77 because we know that if we continue, then it's effectively garbage that will be given back to us, right? So I wanted to stop when it's finished with the 77. So how do I do that? Well, I make a test. While I is less than 7, I want it to keep doing what it should do, which is to print the item, right? Which is to print the item. Okay, so that's my test. And finally, this I++, which I should have written as I is I plus 1, simply means that after I have printed the item, I want to move to the next position. How to do that? Well, just add 1, because if you remember, the positions increase by 1. So it goes from 0 to 1 to 2 and so on. So when I say 0 plus 1, well, it becomes 1. And then it will become 2 and so on. All right, so this is how I set up my for loop. And all I have to do inside of the curly braces is to say what I want to do. In this case, I want to print the item in the array, the value. So the name of the array, square bracket. Normally we would put a position number, right? But obviously we now know that we're not going to put 0 because it will continue to print 11, right? So how do I allow it to be changing from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 and so on? Well, that's easy. I. Okay. All right. So this is the code that allows me to print 11 to 77. Let's test it out and then we'll talk about it. Okay, let's test it out. All right, and we get the values that we wanted, 1 to 77. So why did this work? Well, let's switch over to our slides. All right. Great. And so whenever we want to so whenever we want to print the items or access the items in the array, we use a loop. Okay, and the loop has basically 4 parts. Right? So the first part, right, is where we create a temporary variable that points to the individual box. Okay, so all I'm doing here is to say, you know what, I'm going to create a variable called index. I'm going to set it to 0, which means that this variable, this box, will point to Ben in this case. Okay, now the second step, I need to ask myself, well, how many items in this array? Well, there are 2. Okay, so I will say that I want to print the items in the array. However, when the index becomes 2, then I don't want to print anymore, because obviously index 2 is not existing, it's unknown, and that's what this does. Okay, and then step 3 is where we actually do the printing, and finally step 4 is where we add 1 to index so that it moves from this box to this box. So let's simulate it. Okay, let's simulate it. So when the computer starts up, it's gonna come here, it's gonna see this box declaration, and so it's going to go ahead and it's going to create a box. All right, and it's going to initialize it to 0. Great. Once it has done that, then it's going to come over here to step 2 and it's going to check, is the value inside the index box less than 2? And the answer is true. And because the answer is true, it will execute the action step 3. Right? This is action step 3. Name of the array, the position, which happens to be 0. And so it will print Ben. And very important, it will have to then do step 4, which is to add 1 to index. So index moves from 0 to 1. And so, and this is important, by the way, this step 1, where I create the box and set it to 0, this will only ever be done once. Okay, this is only done once. Good. So again, we increment, it goes from 0 to 1. So index now has 1 in it. Right? Now, we do not go back to step 1, because remember, step 1 is only done once. We instead move from step 4 to step 2, where we check the updated index to see if it's still less than 2. It's currently 1. Is 1 less than 2? True. And because that's still true, we execute the body, which is step 3 here again. Names index is 1, so it's names 1. It prints Jane. Step 4, add 1 to index. So index now becomes 2. And so from step 4, I go back to step 2. Remember, we don't do step 1. Step 2. Index is 2. Is 2 less than 2? That's false. And because that's false, then step 3 is not executed and the loop has finished. That's the end of it. So we will do step 3 as long as step 2 turns out to be true. All right, so let me rephrase, let me quickly recap. Step 1, create an empty box, initialize it to 0. Step 2, test to see that it's less than some value that we have specified, right? In this case 2, the length of the array. Step 3, if this test turns out to be true, we execute step 3, and then we immediately go to step 4. And once we have done step 4, we go back to step 2, and then we test, which is testing again. And if it turns out that it's still true, we continue doing step 3, step 4, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 2, step 3, step 4, and you keep going until eventually step 2 becomes false. And if step 2 becomes false, then we do not execute step 3 anymore and we're done. That's the for loop. Okay, so let's move back to Python tutor. All right, and let's see if we can take that knowledge and use it to print out the values in the array. So I'm going to create a variable called I, set it to 0. Okay, why 0? Well, because the first item starts at 0. And then I'm going to check to see that I don't pass the length, right? So I want to make sure that I can print 0, 1, 2. Okay, so there is no position 3. So I'm going to use that as my test. And then I'm going to increment I. So I will become I plus 1. Okay, which we don't write it this way. We just say I plus plus. Same thing. Okay, so all I want to do now is to say cout name of the array, square bracket, and I, and then a new line. Okay, let's see if we can simulate this. Okay, so notice I have the 3 items in the array. So when you go to line 8 and we enter this for loop, we want to create a variable I, which is initially set to 0. And so even though you're not seeing it, the computer actually does this test. Okay, and so it says, is 0 less than 3 true? That's why it comes to line 9. Okay, and then it executes, well, test I, which is 0, which happens to be 1. Okay, right up here. And then it goes back, but again it actually does this part. So you'll notice that it has to increment this, step 4. So if you look here, you'll notice that I becomes 1, sorry, right? 1. Now you didn't see it, but after it incremented it to 1, it actually checked, was 1 less than 3, and because that was still true, that's why it went back to step 9. Right? Well, not step 9, but line 9. right, which is step number 3. Okay, it executes it, prints 2. And then again, although we don't see it, we're going to add 1 to I, making it 2. And even though we don't see it, it's actually now checking is 2 less than 3, which happens to be true. And so that's why it's back to line 9. Good. Increments I to be 3. And notice, because I becomes 3 and 3 less than 3 is a false statement, then it skips line 9 and it comes to line 12, which is the last line of the program. Right? So again, this loop will only run as long as this test is true. When it turns false, the body inside the curly braces will be skipped, and the for loop will have been considered finished. I hope that made sense. Okay, so I'll leave that here and I'll see you in the next video.